Welcome back to WURD Radio's Pride Month panel, Holding Space. This is your host, Amadee Braxton, and I'm now joined by two special guests who I'm very pleased to have with me for a conversation about allyship. I'm going to start off by introducing each of them. First, we have Tyrell Brown, who is a longtime Philadelphia community organizer who was appointed to executive director of the radical social justice organization Galaei after previously serving as the organization's deputy director. Brown has a wealth of community activism experience in Philadelphia. They helmed local organizing efforts for Bernie Sanders' campaign for president and carried out mutual aid and community organizing work with Reclaim Philadelphia. They've worked as a preschool teacher, directed the Winfield Residents Association camps programming, and co-developed children's programming for the Philadelphia Trans Wellness Conference. Through their leadership at Galaei, Brown has co-organized the 50th annual Pride festivities in Philadelphia, including Pride March and Festival in 2022. He's a compassionate leader who cultivates they are a compassionate leader who cultivates environments that are both resourceful, restorative in the pursuit of justice for marginalized people. And I messed up on your pronouns there, Tyrell, which is a great opportunity for me to clarify what your pronouns are. What pronouns do you use?
I prefer they, them pronouns.
They, them. Okay.
And I always tell people for me personally, my own personal rules for how I operate are not rules that we should all impress and accept or operate with in community. But my own personal praxis is that I do accept he pronouns, and because it's progress, not perfection. So I do, accept when people use he pronouns, and then allow them to correct themselves so that way we can move forward together.
Okay. Well, I hope you accept my correction. Can I just ask you, just for the benefit of our audience who may not be familiar with even the practice of using pronouns, what is important about that?
I think it's important because it allows people, it allows you to give and respect and revere people's journey, and their self-acknowledgement, their journey through learning their own history, but also charting a path forward for their identity. It also, coming from, a background of family that always lifted up and accepted and respected each other's identities. I do know that my indigenous lineage as well, accepted and celebrated two-spirit culture. So always really want to make sure that as well, and bring it into the contemporary now.
You broke up a little bit in what you were saying, so I just want to ask you to repeat. I think you were alluding to your indigenous lineage. Say that again, would you, for the audience?
Yes. I said that also lifting up, indigenous lineage as well, and the celebration of two-spirit identities as well, and knowing that history, and not just me personally, but also as Brown and Black people, that we do have that as well. And so it's using that history and also charting a path forward for it as we bring it up in conversation.
Let's return to that issue of two-spirit identities in indigenous culture, because I think that's something that a lot of people don't know about. But I want to get to introducing our other panelists here before we go there, and that is Taylor Thompson. And Taylor is a public health professional and an ally for the LGBTQ+ community. Thompson became an ally at the age of 14 after joining the Gay Straight Alliance at her local high school. Joining the GSA allowed Taylor to see and hear about the challenges peers were facing and notice the lack of support and encouragement among them from their families and loved ones. Taylor incorporates allyship in her daily life and work by attending local balls, community events, and businesses, while also providing a listening ear and safe space to those of the community who may be experiencing homophobia or discrimination. Taylor is a 2017 alumna of Lock Haven University of Pennsylvania, where she obtained her bachelor's in interdisciplinary studies. with a concentration in public health and social work. She has worked in multiple areas of public health and the LGBT plus community, including mental health, substance abuse, crisis, sexual health testing, education, relinkage, and contact tracing. You are a prevention navigator at Bebashi, Transition to Hope, assisting clients at risk of acquiring HIV with PrEP adherence and connecting them with community resources. And Bebashi is Blacks Educating Blacks about Sexual Health Information. And I know Bebashi, which has been around forever, because I used to do HIV work with youth back in the days at Youth Health Empowerment Project. Welcome, Taylor, to the show. And in reading your bio, I was using she, her pronouns. Are those the pronouns you prefer?
Yes.
Okay. So I want to just welcome to you both for being on this panel about allyship. And I want to just return to you, Tyrell, to just tell us a little bit about the work you're currently doing at your organization, Galaei. For people who don't know about Galaei, Galaei is also a longtime organization that's been doing really amazing work for many, many decades now. Can you just say a little bit about the work the organization does?
Yes. So we partner with Bebashi all the time, by the way. We are right up the street from each other, basically right up the street from each other. So we right now focus on basically community mobilization around people living with HIV, linkage, intersex, non-binary, and gender non-conforming people, and also our youth programming, making sure that we're doing prevention and education services and providing resource events, resource festivals in order to get people mobilized around their wellness, around their all-body wellness. Not just necessarily their health, but, their mental and emotional well-being, because there are so many things, of course, that we know that have impacted us disproportionately over the last 4 years, at the very least, when we're talking about COVID and other health crises that have, impacted us, not to mention any of the other issues that our, our BIPOC siblings are being impacted by right now.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And Taylor, tell us a little bit about what Bebashi does and the work that you all are doing.
Right. So Bebashi is, like Galaei, a nonprofit, and we're dedicated to empowering Black and Brown communities through providing high quality access to healthcare and HIV/AIDS services, health education, and social services. So Bebashi has been around since the beginning of the HIV/AIDS epidemic. So a little bit before I was born, but we've been doing great work, and we have a plethora of things that we do. We go out weekly into different communities. Sometimes we're in Malcolm X Park, sometimes we're in Kensington on our mobile unit testing. Today we're actually having an event. We're having a barbecue, a cook-in today for National HIV Testing Day, as well as a Kiki Lounge. And as a navigator, I assist clients who are at risk of acquiring HIV with their PrEP adherence. And I also connect them to other community resources such as housing assistance, job readiness, education, documentation, anything. We pretty much do it all. So, and aside from the HIV/AIDS realm, we also provide help for food insecurity. We have a food pantry. We have a full service wellness clinic that helps with family planning, HIV care, any type of vaccinations. And we're just growing and growing. So stay tuned. We have more coming.
It's great to hear that organizations that have been around so long are still growing.
Yes, we're still here.
I think perhaps because we've just been going through the COVID pandemic, the HIV is maybe overlooked, or people are like, oh, that's still an issue. That's still a problem. Taylor, just say a little bit more about that, and say a little bit more also, if you could explain what PrEP adherence is, because I don't know that a lot of people even know what PrEP is.
Okay. So for HIV, I actually don't work with DART positive clients. That's more of case management. But for, I know the case managers, they do a lot. Like, they cover every aspect of their lives, like down to their finances and bills. So they're helping them literally like walk through life but staying undetectable. PrEP adherence is pretty much making sure that they're taking their medication as needed. We do check.
Explain what PrEP is, because I think people don't even know what PrEP medication is.
So PrEP is pre-exposure prophylaxis, and it's provided to people who are at risk of acquiring HIV or who may live like a risky lifestyle. It's a daily pill taken every day, and now we actually moved on to the injectable. So you get that every 3 months. And what it does is lowers your risk of acquiring HIV through sex or drug use. And with that, usually if you have two partners who are one's HIV positive, one's on PrEP, their chances of acquiring PrEP through sex is like very, very low if they're taking the medicine how they should. So here at Bebashi, we do, they come in for navigation. We'll connect them to the clinic. They'll receive the PrEP through the clinic. And every 3 months, they check to see if, their labs are well and that they're actually taking the medicine how they should every day. The ones that are on the injectable PrEP, we do have a few. They say that they love it and they don't have to worry about taking a pill daily. They get it, I think every 2 months they get it injected, and then I've only heard success about it. So
it's basically to prevent you from getting HIV if you have a HIV positive partner, or if you could be at risk for getting HIV. In other ways as well. It's really phenomenal that I guess it's kind of like, short of having a vaccine for HIV would be having the PrEP to kind of prevent spreading HIV. That's great. Yep. Well, I feel like I could talk about the ins and outs of what you guys do on a daily basis with your work, because that is kind of similar to what I used to do. But this is a conversation about allyship. And I wanted to go back to you, Tyrell. The importance of allyship is, I think, critical, particularly now. I mean, it always has been. The word solidarity is one of my favorite words. And it comes from my sense that we all need each other in order to be truly liberated as people. It means to me that we have each other's backs, no matter what our differences are. And that's why it's such a powerful concept, this idea of solidarity to me. So allyship is kind of connected to that concept. But I wanted to hear, starting again with you, Tyrell, what is the importance of allyship to you in the context of the LGBTQI people today? How do you think about allyship and how it is enacted?
I mean, I think the way that it's being acted out today, if it's almost, it's like there's not enough acknowledgement of class solidarity.
Tyrell, we're having
class conscious rate in how we discuss issues. We talk about how issues. Yeah, can you hear me?
We're having a little sound problem. I'm wondering if you wouldn't mind turning off your camera, maybe to allow more bandwidth.
This is where I'm thinking it's because it's storming outside right now.
Yeah, I think so too. I think that's better. Go ahead, restart.
Yeah. So I was saying that I think there's the way that I look at it right now, or the way that I see that it impacting our community in both a positive and negative way, is that there's not enough of a focus on class solidarity and a focus on really understanding how we are concerned with issues as a queer community, just like every other community is concerned with issues such as housing, healthcare, and all those things. So not just otherizing the issues that we have because we're queer. It's like, these are issues when we're talking about even basic things like trash pickup. We get annoyed at those things too, right? So, allyship is also, it's a way, I think, that people can really see how the things that are impacting them are also impacting us. And then seeing how our feet are closer to the fire because we do not have, the benefit of a safety net of sorts, especially when we are, pushed to the margins in multiple ways across the prism, being Black and brown and queer and trans. So it's like that the allyship, and more than anything, I think one of the calls that a lot of people make is that we need more people that are accomplices, like people that absolutely feel and understand and have compassion, not just empathy, but like compassion, which propels you to do something. It propels you to get involved. It propels you to actually join in a truly representative solidarity with us and a actualized solidarity with us, not just a sign in the window that says hate doesn't live here, but one that allows you to really join with us. And before we have to march in the streets, that really starts to stand with us at every lattice of this battle, which includes at the polls, which includes, economically, in support of us when we are doing crowdfunding for things, and then really kind of supporting our agency to lead for ourselves as well.
Mm-hmm. So much stuff in what you just said there that I want to unpack. I just want to unite with your making this distinction between allyship and accompliship, and that we're really seeking people to be accomplices in recognizing their own stake in the struggle. So I just wanted to say I agree with you there.
If I can add really quick.
Sure.
So one of my mentors is Barbara Smith. I don't know if you know who Barbara Smith is, but she was one of the keystones in writing the Combahee River Collective. And I met her during Sanders' campaign, and she became one of my mentors. And I talk to her periodically, maybe once every 6 months. She lives in Albany, New York, and Black feminist, lesbian, socialist from the 70s. And one of the things that she unpacked with me, because they coined the term identity politics. And in the coining of it, not the co-opted version of it, but in the coining of it, it was actually more of a self-analysis of the plight and the pain that, your own ancestors have experienced, and then using that pain and matching that or understanding that pain as pain. So that way we can build true solidarity with each other around those things that give us power in that pain. And when she explained it to me, because we see what identity politics is in the media, which is it's like representation and that alone. She gave a deeper meaning, and the true meaning in what she brought it to us with, which was that it's actually a mechanism of me being able to recognize how I've been hurt and how I've been harmed by institutional capitalism and white supremacy, and how that's impacting others, and how it's bending us unrecognizable, but using that as a means to build compassion and consensus, so that way we can operate powerfully as a one when we're taking on institutions that are oppressive.
Beautiful. Yeah, I was reading the manifesto of the Combahee River Collective earlier today to prepare me for this panel. So we're talking about allyship and what allyship means for the Black LGBTQI plus community. Taylor, I wanted to turn with you because as I said it when I introduced you, you joined your Gay Student Alliance or Gay and Straight Student Alliance when you were in high school, when you were 14. So what made you do that? And how has your sense of allyship evolved over the years?
So I've always been one to be very accepting of everyone, regardless of what they look like, who they like, how they identify. And that was something that was instilled in me as a very young child, just to accept everyone, because who are we to judge? So I was involved in theater in high school, and I noticed, a lot of my counterparts were part of the community. And I noticed that theater was the only place where they felt comfortable. And GSA was the only place they felt comfortable. So one day I was just like, let me just go to the meeting. So I went to the meeting and I just would not stop going. And once I heard how how they were impacted, how they were treated at home sometimes, and just how some of my peers would treat people who were just different or finding their way in high school. It just made me upset. So I always, I went out on a whim and I was like, listen, it's no reason to really put that person down just because they identify differently than us, or they may like somebody different than us. So along with that instilled in me the 3 principles that I go by when I think about allyship, which is inclusion. I include everyone, regardless of what they look like, what they dress like, how they identify. Listening. I've always lent a listening ear to that the LGBTQ plus community, because there are barriers that they may have that I don't have as a straight female. And I think it's always interesting to hear the other side of what they're going through, because it's not always on the forefront. Sometimes it is hidden. And support. Just sometimes they don't have the support at home. Sometimes they don't have the support through their friends. So not even just being their friend, just having somebody else to go out to and just talk to about certain things that they may be going through. And it doesn't even have to be strictly LGBTQ plus issues. It could be everything. So that's what kind of led me to be an ally. And ever since then, I haven't turned back. I'm constantly asking my part of the community, but I'm not. I just always have loved everything about the LGBTQ plus community. At the end of the day, everybody's a person to me. So nobody really stands out to me. So I just, try to incorporate everyone in my life.
Mm-hmm. Well, I was, as you were talking about joining the Gay Student Alliance, or the Gay Straight Alliance in your high school at 14, and you started going to meetings, and then you just kind of kept going. What was it that kind of drew you back ongoingly?
I think just the atmosphere. Everybody's so happy. And I love it. Everybody was very happy and welcoming. And in a lot of spaces, being a Black female, you don't get welcomed in a lot of spaces. Females can be very, very catty and just very, very I don't know how to put it. It's always like a race, or somebody has to be better than somebody else. And I just felt like in that space, I was accepted. Nobody looked at me as like, oh, why is this straight girl here? Or like, why is this Black girl here? Like, I just felt one with everyone else. And I think that's what kept me coming back. And then even as I got older, I just started to branch out a little bit more. And I was like, just taking in what I learned at the GSA and applying it to my everyday life.
Can you give an example of something that you feel like you were applying to your everyday life? And I'm asking you that because what I'm hearing you talk about is the ways that your participation and your connection to this community actually has enhanced your life. Mm-hmm. Right? Yeah, it's not like you're just there, out of charity for yourself to help people or do a service, that it's actually enhancing your life.
Mm-hmm. I've learned that people may identify as one way and their sexuality is something completely different. And it's just made me more of kind of like a sponge. I became a sponge, I would say, and just absorbed everyone's, the information that I learned from everyone. And I just kind of apply it in my workspace and just talking to people. And I just go by acceptance. I accept everyone for who they are, regardless of what they look like or who they like. Mm-hmm.
Tyrell, I want to go back to a question or a statement you said earlier when I asked you kind of to define allyship and how you see it manifesting. And one of the things you talked about was the need for more solidarity across class. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I think this is a kind of a third rail or unspoken thing, particularly in the Black community, particularly maybe in this country. People don't talk about class. People are like, well, we're all Black, so all of our issues are the same. But when in fact there are, class privileges actually can create a separation. So tell me, expound more on what you meant when you raised that earlier.
Yeah, I think what I was speaking to is more of the aspects of racial capitalism and how how that really like impacts all of us. Now, the extra layer of being trans, or non-binary or queer or gender non-conforming added to that means there's another layer of discrimination, both implicit and explicit, overt discrimination in spaces. So when we're talking in, the brown and Black community around job loss, we're also talking about a community that can't show up as their authentic selves and even is shown the door, the opposite side of the exit sign before you're even able to apply. Not to mention, not being validated by your chosen name and so many other barriers that you have to like scale in order just to be involved in a system that is oppressive and not sufficient at all, even as it is. So there's just a lot of hurdles to overcome. And I think when we talk about class solidarity, especially in Philadelphia, as the cliche, the poorest major city in America, right? And then we have people being asked to make a choice, or conversations being brought up around, cultural choices or differences in regards to the queer community, the trans community, the gay community, and the cis het community, the cis hetero community. It's like we're all in this boiling pot here in Philadelphia, being impacted by institutions that are underserving us. So it doesn't serve any of us to kind of like point fingers at one another. So there has to be a undergirding understanding or acknowledgement that, as I said, we are impacted and we are concerned with many of the same quality of life issues that everyone else is when it comes to systemic poverty and institutionalized poverty and racism and so on and so on. So, and I think it's a really important, crucial context when I talk to people about, the things that happen, the services that we do here at Galaei and what Bebashi does and so many other organizations around the city. The reason why we exist is to support people in economic measures and economic liberation and support. And those organizations, as we operate, are also trying to address the same issues that are impacting cis het, Black and brown people as well. So it's like, there has to be an understanding across the board, a compassion, if you will, that your neighbor, regardless of gender identity, is also dealing with the impacts and the onset of institutionalized, white supremacy and capitalism that really we haven't really had a reckoning of those things when it comes to economics. We just haven't. I think we've made movements in that direction, but we are still, by and large, as we're speaking right now, dealing with people that are couch surfing or homeless altogether, not to mention people that are fleeing states from around the country in order to come to relative brave spaces like Philadelphia for refuge. So, and we have not created a robust safety net for those things. So there has to be an understanding of class solidarity because they are now, the eye is focused on our community, but it wasn't so long ago, or maybe it never lifted off of Black folks. So so that understanding that like what's impacting us and what we are standing for and standing against aren't necessarily different dynamics that have impacted us historically as brown and Black people as well.
Mm-hmm. So I think it's such an important point. And as you were kind of saying that, I was thinking about the fact that, and I alluded to this in an earlier segment with my previous guest. I had a guest on a couple of weeks ago on my regular show from this organization called the Rainbow Railroad, which provides services, financial support for LGBTQI refugees who are fleeing persecution in their home countries around the world. And one of my listeners at the time posted on Facebook, well, this is a gay issue, as if this was somehow separate from the issues of concern for Black people. And, I think about, and I'm circling back to what you were saying about the class and the economics, because, if we look at, one of the biggest issues that we've seen covered in the media and that has kind of galvanized the attention of the country and has kind of top of concern for many, many of us is, police brutality and the killing of George Floyd, the killing of Sandra Bland, the killing of and abuse by police, right? But if we dig deeper into those cases, and if we understood the class dimensions of what people like a George Floyd was experiencing, perpetually challenged in terms of employment, really marginalized economically, struggling with mental health issues, with addiction issues, all of these things that we want to just kind of simplify as like he was targeted because he was Black. Well, he was also targeted because he was economically disenfranchised also. And there's all these combination of factors that so many of us are facing. And we can't parse it out in, as like, oh, it's this piece of me or it's this piece of me that is being discriminated against. It's a kind of, and I said earlier, we're complex people, right? We contain multitudes. So I don't know. I'm kind of on I have my one foot up on a soapbox right now, so I'll take it down. But I guess I'm uniting with what you were saying around just the complexity and also the fact that we need to recognize how we are in the same boat.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's also, I think one of the things that I always, not always, but like what I've learned more and more is, when I was younger, like when Taylor was explaining about about joining a QSA or a GSA when she was 14. Like when I was in high school, we weren't lucky enough. They hadn't really even started GSAs. Like I was a sophomore in high school, right when the Matthew Shepard incident happened in Laramie, Wyoming. So the fear of coming out.
Plus community as if it's a choice that they've made to be who they are, that it's like a lifestyle they've chosen or something. And I want to just, very adamantly set the record straight on that. Could you just elaborate a little bit more on what you were beginning to get into there?
Yeah. So someone actually shared it really powerfully with me yesterday. It was a client that we had here. And what they shared with me was that, like, of all the decisions that we have to make in an everyday, our lives every single day, of all the decisions that we have to make in order to survive and to get by, that the things that come most naturally to us to operate most powerfully from, to say that those things are a choice is ludicrous. And I when they shared that with me, I was like, it is sort of like a really dated and archaic, practice or ideology that we're still in the place of selecting to do anything more but share who they are authentically. As someone who was a preschool teacher, I share this story all the time. Before any references to LGBTQ, before any references to the queer culture at all, one of my students, 5 years old, he came to me and told me that
Tyrell, we're having some
girl. And this was at the age of 5. And my identity in the classroom, the only thing that I did was
again. Yeah, go ahead. Say it again.
Can you
Sorry.
hear me again now?
Yeah. Start again. Yeah. You were saying as a
No, it's okay. I apologize.
No, it's okay.
There is a 5-year-old student of mine here. as a preschool teacher, a 5-year-old student of mine came to me and shared with me that they were not a girl and that I needed to stop calling them, stop calling them a girl. This is at the age of 5, and this is 13 years ago. So this idea that it's like this trend, and if anything, the trend is that we have more affirming care, more affirming families, a more affirming community that is embracing the support that is necessary in order to hold all of us. So I think, this idea that that still is pervasive, that people are making a choice. And earlier today, I was talking with a friend, and they were speaking about how one of their barbers had the same barber since they were a child. And the barber was still kind of set in that idea that we have an agenda. And I'm like, that's the otherization again of who we are as a people, because on my agenda every single day is to go to and from work, to eat healthy, to get in my own bed at the end of the night. That's my agenda. Like, we don't have an undergirding nefarious script somewhere hidden away that we are reading off of in order to perpetuate harm in the community. If anything, we are just trying to add vibrancy, light, and love to a community that unfortunately has had it stripped away from it for centuries. Mm-hmm. And I think that should be celebrated.
Absolutely. I want to just build on something you were saying. Well, actually go back to something you said at the very start of this conversation, Tyrell, which was you alluded to the notion of two-spirit people, and that is kind of a gender expression category in some indigenous communities. Could you say a little bit more about that for people who may have not heard that term before?
Yeah. It was brought to me by last year. I was lucky enough to meet someone who I now claim as my aunt and who claims me as their nephew, my aunt Tammy. And Tammy is indigenous, and I was able to connect her to her actual blood relative last year, Abba. And Abba is two-spirit. And Abba's partner as well is also two-spirit. And they really gave me an education on historically how it's been celebrated in indigenous communities, that, people that embody both the masculine and the feminine spiritually. I don't want to speak incorrectly to it because they could definitely educate people more succinctly on it. But the root work that I think that it takes to really dig deep culturally to look at what our true history is as a people, and not necessarily what's been taught to us to share and to perpetuate, but really ways that we have operated for centuries as a tribal people, and how we all, got along or all work together towards the same goal of our survival. And I think, and it was always in the space of lifting up the best in us. That's what I always feel. And not otherizing or separating out what has been taught for us to demonize. And so they explained it to me much better. But I think, knowing that was always a mechanism, that was always an identity that was there throughout history, culturally, is like an important context here, that we're not new here.
Right.
I was reading the other day that the first gender affirming clinic was actually back in 1932. And that being this was already there, and that the first books that were burned during the Holocaust were actually the books that taught people how to do reassignment, gender affirming surgeries. So that right there tells me we've been here a long time, and this has been something historically that we have operated in order to validate and lift up who we are authentically, and also as a measure of all body and all spirit wellness. So the idea that we're new here, that this is a new phenomenon, really is a a divisive narrative that's being perpetuated, a conservative and divisive narrative that's being perpetuated, and it's not forwarding the Black and Brown community as a whole. We're not taking a step forward with it because, as we like to say all the time, we're not leaving, not going anywhere. We are going to be here, so we have to get it together.
Right. And I learned today in some research I was doing, there are approximately 60,000 Black LGBTQ people in this state of Pennsylvania alone. So, hey, so
only 60,000?
Only 60,000. That's the conservative estimate. Just quickly, because I have about 40 seconds left. I want to just turn it back to you, Taylor. Any advice for anybody listening about, for anybody who wants to be a better ally to this community, what advice might you offer?
That's funny. I was actually just thinking about that. Okay. I think it's just important to listen and just lend a shoulder, an ear, or even just listen. And just always think about acceptance. And I always try to put myself in that person's shoes and think about how you would feel if you were underrepresented or marginalized. And just think about them as a person and just think about uplifting others, because you never know, the person you could be an ally for could be the person sitting next to you or somebody in your family. So you wouldn't want somebody to treat that person a certain way. So I think it's just all about support and just inclusion, listening, and supporting.
Great. Well, on that note, we're going to end there for this portion of our panel. Those listening should stay tuned for the final hour, where we're going to be talking about queer space. What does that mean? What's that concept about here in Philadelphia? I want to thank my guest, Tyrell Brown, Executive Director at Galaei, and Taylor Thompson, who's the Prevention Navigator at Bebashi. Thank you both so much for all the work that you do tirelessly day in and day out, and thank you for being a part of this conversation. Welcome back to Holding Space, WURD Radio's Pride Month panel, hosted by me, Amadee Braxton, your familiar voice of the Solution Show on Fridays. I'm very pleased to be here hosting this special broadcast to celebrate and give space and voice to the Black LGBTQ community in Philadelphia, or leaders and representatives of it. And I'm joined now by my two next guests for our final hour, who I'm very excited to get into conversation with. I'll first introduce Eric Cole, who is a business systems analyst and certified life coach and host of the Hung Up podcast, a Philly-based culture and society platform from a Black queer perspective. Since 2017, guests from all walks of life have brought their knowledge, stories, and expertise to the show. Educators, singers, artists, actors, authors, community engagers, and advocates, podcast hosts, health advocates. The Hung Up podcast exists to encourage, inform, and share experiences of the people impacting various spaces throughout the community. And Eric was a Temple University alumnus and two-time Philly tennis champion. Okay, I'm obsessed with tennis, so you and I are going to have to talk later about that, but that's a whole other show.
Oh, yes, we can do it. I'm also obsessed with the game of tennis, and I truly believe that in my next lifetime, I'll be a professional tennis player. I'm just going to go ahead and claim it.
Okay, please do. Oh, my gosh. Okay, well, that's a whole other story. Welcome to the show, Eric. I'm very happy to have you.
Thank you for having me. This is exciting. I finally made it to radio. Everyone's always telling me I have a radio voice.
You do. I listened to your podcast and I was like, wow, this child was made for, they have the radio voice. Perfect. So really glad to have you.
So thank you for having me here. I'm excited for this conversation.
You're very welcome. And my next panelist is Ebony Ali, also known as Icon Ebony Fierce. Icon Ebony Fierce is a Philadelphia-based performance artist that has one mission: to change people's perception of artistic expression, one subculture at a time. Icon has a background in theater, dance, spoken word performance. Icon has been community organizing, curating events all throughout Philadelphia since 2012. Icon also specializes in burlesque, performance art, and drag. Their content includes body positivity, political, social issues, gender equality, etc. They are also a co-curator for festivals like Philadelphia Pride Festival, Freakin' Queer, Hot Bits Film Festival, Snatcherella 3000, and more things, always centering queer QTPOC.
Yes.
What is
queer trans people of color?
Oh, queer trans people of color. Okay, I'm sorry. That's a new one. That's a new acronym.
Queer and trans people of color, yeah.
Thank you. Things that are always centering queer trans people of color with an alternative point of view. Icon is currently a board member of the William White Community Center and the youth program manager at Galaei. Welcome to the show.
Hi, I'm so excited to be here. Yes.
I'm very happy to have you. Let me just invite each of you to say a little bit more than what I read in your bios about what you do and how you operate to kind of build and hold queer space in Philadelphia. Let me start with you, Eric.
Thank you. Sure. So I've been curating this space since 2017. It was honestly a gift to me. I was asked to be a guest on the podcast way back then. And the original founder had to move on and he kind of just gave it to me. And so I've been curating this space since 2017 to really share queer people's experiences and to tell our stories in our way versus having someone else tell that story or control that narrative. I remember when I first started out, I always said I wanted to be the gay Oprah. I mean, I feel like I'm still, living that and walking in there, but just truly of me, just claiming, just saying, I want to be the next, not having to attach it to anyone else, but still can admire her and so many other people. And so this platform, it was also important for me to refer to it as a queer platform. And over the years, I've had to, people have asked me or have challenged me as to why I use that. And for me, it was very simple. I just wanted to always be as inclusive as I possibly can. And, back in 2017, not all of these conversations were happening the same way that they're happening today. But it was always for me about embracing everyone, allowing us to show up as complicated and unique and intricate as we are. I wanted to, in the beginning, I personally was looking for a space that was telling our stories. I wasn't always interested in the drama and, some of what pop culture or mainstream culture is kind of like engrossed in constantly, especially what we see on Twitter and on the Instagram timeline. I wanted something a little bit more. I wanted to be uplifted by my people. I wanted to hear the stories and experiences of my people. I knew there were many of us out there. I just wanted to be a part of that. So I said, well, I'm going to go ahead and create that.
Well, what's beautiful, I didn't have time to listen to all 420 something episodes of your podcast yet, but I will say what I was just pleased about, and I don't know what I was expecting, but in listening to your podcast, I was like, these are just Black people who are queer, who are artists, who are educated, like I said, the list of the kinds of people you have on your show, who are talking about their experiences being artists or doing whatever they do, and they just happen to be queer. So it's, and yes, that may come up in the conversation, but it's not necessarily the focus. You're focusing on them as whole people, and what they do and who they are. And, with anything like that, as you're listening, you're like learning and trying to apply their life lessons to your own life lessons. And you're a great interviewer as well. So I just want to also give you that.
Thank you. I appreciate that. My passion was always to be interviewing, not necessarily to be an expert in any one of these areas, but just to bring the experts to the conversation and let them tell their stories and let them inform and let them educate. And just like you just said, I'm picking up these things as I along the way. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. And I just want to clarify something you said, and then I want to get to you, Icon. Eric, you said using the term queer as your kind of framing for the name of or what you're trying to do with your podcast is to have a queer space. And people were asking you, like, why are you using that term? Just explain a little bit in more detail for listeners who may not be familiar why that term is important, why you see it as an inclusive term.
Yeah, so I think especially in the beginning, starting out, I just talked to a lot of the people that I was interested in being my audience, men and women, Black and brown, of the LGBTQ plus spectrum. And a lot of our folks, I say Black folks, were like, gay doesn't necessarily reflect my experience, or it doesn't necessarily reflect how I feel in this space that we call America. And especially being is that a lot of men do listen to the podcast. I acknowledged early on that not all men identify as gay. And I didn't want to push anyone out of this conversation. It was always about bringing people in. And so I was intentional about using that, and wanted to embrace, and I do. I embrace men from all over the spectrum, and they come on and they tell their stories and they share and they educate, and they're giving those nuggets to the community. And it's been a beautiful thing. It's Black. I'm seeing more Black people kind of gravitate toward queer, and kind of take that word back. Some of the pushback that I got was what the word kind of meant back in the day, or how people were made to feel about the word. And it's about reclaiming that power and taking back what's ours, and we define it. We are the culture. And the culture moves when we say we want it to move. We're doing that even right now in this moment. And so giving that power back to the people, back to our people, was really important to me.
Thank you for that. Ebony, I want to go to you now, because you create so many queer spaces in this city. Talk a little bit about what your intentions are, what you're seeking to do in the work that you're doing.
So like when I first started, like performing and being in community, my impression was, I'm like this 23-year-old like weird kid that just wanted to do art and just wanted to perform. And I've noticed that like, for somebody like me and like other people like me, like there's not any space for them, and people would put you in a box, or people will force you to be in a box, and people will want you to conform to what people perceive a Black queer person as. And with that, like I didn't feel like there was any inclusion with not only just Black folks, because there was no inclusion with Black folks. There's no inclusion for Black queer folks, Black trans folks, Black non-binary folks. In fact, like, I felt like, if I did see anyone, it would be like tokenism, or like there would be mistreatment or like harassment in these spaces and on stage. So I, always pushed back, and I always just wanted to just do my own thing and didn't went against the grain. So, throughout time, I just got really tired of it, and I kind of took the lessons I learned from people I've worked with and paying attention to how things work, and started to create my own DIY kind of spaces. Which is not really easy at first, but I kind of started to build the community that consists of people like me. I started outsourcing different like communities, and pretty much finding my tribe outside of the neighborhood, outside of mainstream queer spaces, and figured out how to bring those people together so we can just be like, you know what, we don't need those spaces. We can just go and create our own and build from there.
Let me ask you both this question, because when we talk about, queer space, and well, first, even before I go to my question, I just want to say, I consider you both to be cultural workers, culture makers, and I think that is a very critical but overlooked function in the community, in any community, is the people who are creating culture, who are creating space for culture to flourish and to evolve and to, to represent, different experiences, but also to kind of evolve those experiences and to experiment and all of those kinds of things. So I just want to honor you both for your work in playing that critical role that I think we don't recognize it so much. But talk about, and I'll start with you, Eric, talk about, when we talk about queer space, what does that even mean to you as a concept, queer space? Yes, it's kind of in the work that you're doing, but just talk about what that means, because it can mean, it's not just the physical space. It can mean a lot of different things. So, Eric, what do you think when you hear the term queer space?
I think of somewhere that's like special for me, that I can just find something for me. And we're also different. And so I think there's space and room for everyone to have a seat at the table to help curate this culture and this environment, because it's not going to be a one size fits all. I think that's number one, and that's really important. We need the workers. We need everyone here at the community sharing those experiences and providing that expertise, the advocates, so that way there's something for everyone. And also, like, when I think of that space, I think of also safety, and you would. And what's all Black isn't always safe all the time either. And I think that's also important to point out as we talk a lot about safe spaces, because especially when you look at the timeline, a lot of the back and forth is going between us in the community. And I feel like issues like gay issues, trans issues, these things really divide us and keeps us from really forming a Black agenda that we all can get on and really march forward together, unified. I think even the other side, they use these things as tools. They know it divides us. And it's no coincidence that we see these things really being at the center of a lot that's going on in the country right now. I think that's no coincidence. Absolutely.
Ebony, what about you in terms of when you think about queer space? What does that mean to you?
Just to think about what Eric said, because what Eric said is like, to the T. I will also consider queer space. Queer for me is just like anything outside of what, people consider heterosexual or cis. It's like, the others, the other people. And as Black people were used to just being the others. I would look at all spectrums of people who have been pushed aside, like disabled people, trans people, non-binary people, people that's on the spectrum, all those folks that like sober people that don't have a space in the community because they've been pushed aside, and there's no space for them. Those spaces are not accessible for them. And it's important for all queer spaces, if you're going to have a space where people are welcomed outside of the cis and hetero community, why not it be inclusive to the whole community? That also includes women, that also includes like anyone outside of, just gay men. Like, I feel like we have been conditioned to only have queer spaces be a gay bar or, hardy kind of spaces or hookup kind of spaces. Like, it's time to like kind of, and there's nothing wrong, of any of those spaces, all those things are very important, especially historically. But like, we need to kind of shift the idea of what a space looks like. We have to start being creative, because, not everybody wants to sit at home because they don't feel safe going to a place. We have to be considerate of who all of our community is. And I feel like it's hard for people to understand, or people get lazy because they're like, why are things, have to be so different? Why do we have to change things all the time? Those things have always existed. It's just that those people are not out to look at for those spaces and find community, because we're not welcoming them. We're not allowing them or accommodating to them.
And you know, I want to I want to just kind of go back to something you were just saying about like historically the like gay bar space has been important. Mm-hmm. Talk a little bit about the evolution because like from your vantage point, what was important about those spaces, and how have we been evolving beyond just the gay bar as like the queer space to go to?
Well, before Stonewall, we know gay bars were the only spaces where gay folks can meet. And those spaces have always been rated by the police, as we know. But before that, you couldn't, gay people couldn't come together in public because that was illegal, or they will get harassed or worse. So these underground spots and these speakeasies, now known as clubs, are the only places where gay people can openly meet, make friends and date and other things. So those spaces will always be important because that's there's no other place where, that can even happen. Not even at a bookstore. There are some older like cafes and stuff, but in the daytime and in places outside of like New York or San Francisco or anywhere, it's not really safe to, have people of the same sex or trans people walk in the daylight. It just would not happen. And as time went on after Stonewall, of course, there were always like harassment. And during the AIDS crisis of the 80s, spaces were not regularly really safe, even in those in gay bars and gay spaces, because there was always people harassing us. Mm-hmm. So as time went on, and as we gotten legislations and things have tightened up, and we created more safe spaces, now we can kind of think, where else can we meet? Where else can we build community? It doesn't have to be in a space where there's like a bar. It doesn't have to be a space where it's a party environment. It doesn't have to be a space that's at night. I feel like we have, especially in major cities, we have enough resources. We have enough people where we can do all kinds of things that's accommodating for the entire queer community.
Right. I want to just share, thank you to Kayla J., who is engineering the show today, a report that had come out in 2017 that was compiled by the Philadelphia Commission on Human Relations, which at that time was headed by Rue Landau, who is one of our nominated Democrats for city council now. But the report really compiled testimony from a public hearing about many complaints that were lodged to her office at the time around discrimination, racial discrimination in the gayborhood and in many of the white dominant or white owned gay establishments in the gayborhood. And if for people who don't know, the gayborhood is a part of Center City downtown that has historically been home to the LGBTQ community of Philadelphia, maybe more of the mainstream community, if you can say that. It is an ever evolving narrative. But this report came out basically identifying that there was clear issues of discrimination. So this relates to our topic of queer space and the fact that a lot of queer space has been centered in gay bars, in the gayborhood, for example. There also have been periodically, maybe sporadically, some Black queer bars or clubs, but in my experience, they haven't necessarily been able to have the longevity that one would hope. I'm 52 years old, so I'm talking about in the 80s and 90s, things that I heard, there were different bars, that cater to Black queer community, and they never really seemed to last long, perhaps because of financial struggles or things like that. But I want to just go back to this question about queer space and the evolution. And Ebony, I was talking to you, you were talking about that and kind of historically the importance of the gay bar space, and now how we're kind of evolving to have more inclusive, different spaces.
Mm-hmm.
So pick up on that. What has been the problem in your experience with some of the traditional spaces that, again, were haven and kind of the only place that people could go earlier on, but have kind of become problematic or had become problematic?
To put it frankly and not, not going to be around the bush, racism and transphobia, this blatant racism and transphobia from those spaces from producers and management and beyond. And throughout time, when certain people that will fit into the, how can I say this? At first, it was a dress code issue that was an issue with bars. There was issues with how people were dressed, and there was some sort of apprehension against those people that were dressed a certain way. That
and what was that way? What
in a way that is perceived as urban,
which is code for black.
Code for black, yeah, and just things that were just racist. There were Timbs, fitteds,
couldn't wear, so they had rules that you couldn't wear Timbs into the bar.
Well, there was a bar that had a problem with that, and there was and in general, it was always an unspoken thing where people like that would enter into spaces. Those people would get watched more closely. There were issues with patrons that would say racist things and they would get away with it. I have experienced situations where people have said, blatantly racist things towards me. Whether it's at a bar or at a dressing room, at a show, or, just practices with, to go back with drag, practices with casting. A lot of shows were mostly white casts. And it took me a very long time for people to put me, pay me for a show. And after that, it was still not enough black entertainers. It was just a handful. And at one point, I was hosting shows, and I would be the only black person in the room.
Wow,
audience included. And I'm just this, Philadelphia has. It's majority PLC. It has a lot of black people in it. Why doesn't this reflect in any of these spaces? And why is the only area that's meant for queer folks or gay folks not inclusive to these folks? And that's the same thing with nonprofits too. There were issues with inclusivity with boards and the way that people will get services and everything. So luckily, we did a town hall back in 2020 with myself and Joe. It was moderated by Amber Hikes, where we called out bar owners and producers for not being inclusive in shows, and also for black folks being sexually harassed in spaces and being told they have to do certain numbers and being told that they were doing things that were too ghetto and not sellable for the audience. That was the thing, when it comes to drag, are you sellable? And usually with black folks, being sellable means you have to fit into a certain stereotype, or you have to be a comedic kind of a joke for white folks in the audience. We forced a lot of people to step down, and things have shifted around. But we obviously have a long way to go, where a lot of a lot of people are still doing the same things that, we
Same
called
practices.
4 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
I think they're slick. They tried to do, their little diversity hires once or twice and 3 times. And then all of a sudden people are getting, kicked out of places again, banned. And people are still doing all white casts. So, we still have a long ways to go. But I would say that there are spaces now where there are a lot more Black folks and there's a lot more trans folks. There's a lot more inclusive folks. So we have to celebrate that. We have Level Up, which is a Black-owned bar, which is amazing. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you should check that out. And I have to give a shout out. There's a lot of shows at Frankie Bradley's that has a lot of Black and trans folks that have amazing casts. So there is still positive things happening in the community, but we still have a long way to go.
So what I'm hearing, what I'm getting from what you've been describing is like and this is always the case, right? We have to fight against the institutions that exist to be included while simultaneously creating our own spaces and
at the same time.
Yeah.
And go outside of the neighborhood to do so. A lot of spaces have been created after people protest the eye candy. Which is great. But, we deserve and we should have a place in the table any and everywhere. We don't have to go somewhere else to have our space at the table.
Right. So, Eric, I want to turn to you. When we are thinking about like alternatives to what exists, what comes to mind for you?
So right away, I think of my co-host. So I have a YouTube show. It's Hung Up Pod Live. And my co-host is a licensed therapist. His name is Tony Purnell. And he hosts a biweekly support group. And it's called Men of Colors. And it's right here in Center City, Philadelphia. Parking can be a little stressful, but once you find a parking space or you just give up and you go into a lot, it's really all worth it. Tony's group is a safe space for men to talk about things like dating, their professional life, their sexual health, and he does exercises and provides resources and outlets to things that are happening here in the community. So I definitely wanted to plug that. And I'm also just thinking about some of the people that I've interacted with because of the podcast. Mario Javon, he heads up My Messy Roots. My Messy Roots is a leadership and coaching community for men of color. And it's for coaches and also for people who are looking for coaching, like anybody. And it's very niche. And I think that's a great thing about coaching, is that there's all types. You have life coaches, you have athletic coaches, you have nutrition specialists, everyone has their niche. And so I'll be teaming up with Mario soon. And so My Messy Roots is another one. I wanted to shout out Marquise Davine right here in the city of Philadelphia. He has Keeping It a Bean podcast and also This American Negro podcast. He's doing a ton of community work. Mark My Style, he's here in the city. He's a photographer and he's working with a lot of people. So I could go on. Like if you just, because this is the thing. Mainstream media will have us thinking that we're not out here doing nothing. That is, you know what I mean? That is nothing out here for us. And that all we have is the parties and the things like that. And we've already discussed that those spaces are great and we need those. But there's also a lot of people out here doing the work, who are using whatever resources that they can. Some people have a lot of resources. Some people have the bare bones. But they are putting forth a lot to do the work in the community. And sometimes it does take a little bit of effort because these things are not always placed in front of us on a nice platter. Sometimes it does take a little work to kind of dig these things up. But there's really all different types of spaces here in Philly. Philly also has a really prominent ballroom community and ballroom history.
Yeah, let's talk about that. That's so important. Explain for people who are totally ignorant of what ballroom culture is or what ballroom is, can you just give a quick definition or explanation, and then talk about what the importance of it?
So ballroom started as a space from Crystal of Asia. And you can look at the documentary The Queen for reference, where the Queen. I think it's on Netflix. Yeah.
Okay.
And The Queen was a documentary that was based in New York about drag pageants that happened in the late 60s. And that had tastemakers like Warhol and things like that, because it's New York City and it's queer folks. So Crystal of Asia used to compete in pageants, and she lost a pageant. And she went on this legendary rant that people know, where, she, was just going off about losing against this white girl, this white drag queen. And later on, she is known for starting the first ball in New York City, where trans girls would walk and compete for prizes and trophies by category. And throughout time, it went from drag to performance and voguing, and then it went on to include other categories, such as face, performance, siren, body, etc., etc.
So all these different categories.
All these different categories, and reached its popularity in the late 80s, early 90s, where Paris is Burning documentary was filmed during. It's very important because this is another example of Black and brown people taking the space and creating their own, because white spaces did not include them or want to include them, or mistreated them, especially Black drag queens and Black trans women. So, to this day, ballroom has influenced modern pop culture. People have stolen a lot of things from ballroom and still continue to. So I'm glad that people are finally recognizing and hiring these people that used to be behind the scenes, because a lot of people in ballroom are the makeup artists, are the choreographers, are the stylists, and all those things and creative directors. So I'm glad that, these people are now in the forefront and now getting their flowers.
Can you share, is there a prominent example of where something from ballroom culture has been appropriated or stolen and kind of used by mainstream? I mean, the one that comes to mind for me is Madonna's voguing.
Yeah, that's one example. There's too many to even name.
Okay.
The language, especially with RuPaul's Drag Race, just modern lingo, things like shade, reading, just little things like that has been, or just aesthetic wise, that's been taken and used. And you know what, art, is always influencing each other and,
right.
Evolving, but,
And what do they say? Oh, go finish your thought.
No, but if you're gonna use that, at least recognize that those people that have created those things exist and don't push them to the back. That's
right,
all.
Right. And I was going to say, what is the saying? Imitation is a form of flattery. Mm-hmm. It's almost like the art form of ballroom culture is so powerful that people wanted to snatch it up because it was just so fierce and so fabulous that everybody was like, oh, wow. So, and also, I don't know if you mentioned this, but, another depiction of this culture and its evolution in terms of ballroom was to show Pose.
Yes.
Right. So that was like kind of a more recent example.
I like Pose because it was the first time people, besides Paris is Burning, in a long time, that people saw ballroom in a way that's portrayed with people in the from the ballroom scene, and also talked about things outside of that and outside of the glamour, and talked about like the AIDS epidemic back at that time and real life struggles and the things that Black and brown queer folks have went through. So, yeah.
Yeah, and it included trans actors.
Yep.
Prominent starring roles.
Like MJ Rodriguez and more, and yeah.
Well, I want to we have a few more minutes left, and I want to just close on like the importance of queer Black culture, period, because, you know, the Black culture or Black people have always been kind of at the cutting edge and forefront of culture, and we have influenced the world with our culture. And, you know, we were just kind of getting into that a little bit with the ballroom culture specifically, but Black queer culture and Black queer space. Like, Eric, I want to ask you in terms of where you see, you know, I alluded to both of you as like culture workers earlier, but like, where do you see the work of culture and queer Black culture going forward from here? Like, what is needed? Where do you see like the culture needing to be represented and the spaces needing to be created?
I kind of see it as like we're going to be taking it to the next level. We've talked everything out until we could have talked it out. I mean, I think a lot of people in the community are tired of talking, and we're tired of having those same conversations. We're particularly tired of trying to educate folks on the other side of the aisle that continuously show that they are not interested in learning or deviating away from anything that they already believe. And it's time for us to start looking inward, nurturing inward, because a lot of the folks, the civil rights leaders and great thinkers that were here that have passed on have told us, like, they have a tendency to use it as a tool to wear us out. And we have to remember that some of that work that needs to be done, we have to pull that energy back into our community. I think so much is going out. There's so much discord in the community. It seems like everyone is fighting over everything, especially when you go to the Twitter timeline. It just seems like everything is up for debate, and it's just so much anger. There's so much frustration. Everybody wants to be heard. Meanwhile, everybody feels unacknowledged, and it's just causing so much strife and unfortunately sometimes violence within the community. And so I think a lot of folks are going to start like looking inward. They're going to start looking for us to make movement. We don't want to talk anymore. How can we put some of this into action? Can we make this happen? How do we get our local leaders, the people that we're putting into office, involved in these conversations to help us really change and impact what our lives are like day to day, and trying to move and shift some of those conversations and getting our allies, and you were talking about that earlier today, to even kind of shift it into doing more intentional work. And that's what you all were talking about here on the show. So it's a lot of shifting, it's a lot of moving, it's a lot of holding people accountable to what they said they were going to do and what we talked about what we're going to do, and putting that into action and moving forward.
And what about you, Ebony? Your thoughts about where the culture is going, what is needed?
I think Eric made some like beautiful points, because I feel like it's time. I think people are going to look inward and try to figure out what are some other ways to get our point across. I feel like healing spaces are important as well. I feel like, a lot of Black activists and people in the community, we forget to heal. We forget to, it's all about work. And activists, conversation, social media. I feel like I feel like a lot of more people are creating healing spaces. I know some friends that are like, that has like, kind of like self-care kind of spaces, and self-care not meaning like, spa and pamper yourself, but like having conversations where we can, just like unload and unleash all of that trauma and hurt and pain that we go through as people, and like, spiritual spaces and holistic spaces. I feel like that stuff is very important because we cannot pour from an empty cup.
Absolutely.
And it's important for us to take care of ourselves and each other. And so we can come together and take things to the next level. Because I do think that we are entering into a new era. And the way that things are looking, like we can't continue to be like this. We have to band together and uplift and move forward.
Yes, absolutely. Well, on that note, we're going to end the conversation. I want to thank both of you so much for all the work that you do day in and day out, the spaces that you create and make to be inclusive for others. Like my mentor, Tony K. Bambara, always said, the importance of culture work is so critical yet overlooked. And culture change always precedes political change. So the work that you guys are doing is so critical. It's foundational to everything else that we want to see. So thank you for doing it. Thank you for lifting up the other examples that you know of. And take care of yourselves.